Okay.
We are live.
We are live. All right, well, we'll commence proceedings. Kia ora, good morning, all on screen. Protocol for the Commission before we go into any formalities is to open with karakia. And Benita, if you'd be able to lead us through our karakia, I'd be grateful.
Kia ora tātou, ko te karakia whakatimata I tēnei ata, whakataka te hau. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tunga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. Kia hi ake ana te a tākura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, ti hei, mauri ora. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora, Benita. So in terms of introductions this morning, we'll just ask fellow commissioners to introduce themselves, and then we'll go through the rest of the commission team, pass over to you, Chair Rachel, for your introductions of who you've got on board, and then we'll get into the proceedings. So if I just go back to Benita, Commissioner Bigham, you introduce yourself, and then we'll go to Commissioner Piper.
Tēnā nō tātou. Thank you everybody for the opportunity to introduce myself this morning. I am Bonita Bigham. I'm a current community board member for the Taranaki Coastal Community Board and South Taranaki District Council, and a former 3-term councillor with South Taranaki District Council. Kia ora.
Kia ora koutou. I'm Sue Piper. I've been involved in various aspects of local government for a little over 30 years now. Cheers.
And kia ora, I'm Brendan Duffy, former Mayor of the Horowhenua. I would know a reasonable number in the room, I suspect, even though we can't see you all on the screen, and have the current role as Chair of the Commission, which is, from a Commission's perspective, a crucial role in the principles of democracy, and these representation reviews are part of that process of ensuring that communities across New Zealand have the sort of representation that's important to them. On the screen also the team from the office, so you'll see EJ Ruthven, Donald Rezabos, and Penny Langley. So the team have done a great job in the background getting us set up for today, and we're grateful. If I could pass over to you, Chair Rachel, for your intros, and then we'll get into the formalities.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Rachel Keedwell tōku ingoa, ko te korumātua o ngā pai tēnei e mihi ana. So I'm Rachel Keedwell, I'm Chair of Horizons Regional Council. In the room with me, I have Michael McCartney, the Chief Executive of Horizons. I also have Pen Tucker and Catherine Tongs, who have been part of our representation review process. There are some other staff in the room, and of course online we have Daryl Griffin, who is our consultant, who's been instrumental in the representation review.
Perfect, thank you. Hopefully we get to see some of you guys if that camera swings around or not. I don't know whether it will. Anyway, so from now, we're in your hands, Chair Rachel, for your intros. There he is. And the proceedings are simple. You'll give a summary of your decision. We've got Mark Chilcott seeking to speak, so we'll hear his perspectives. There'll be questions from commissioners that can be recorded for your right of reply, and then we'll go into our deliberations after that. So pretty simple process. So we're in your hand. You'll appreciate we've obviously received all the appropriate documentation that you've sent through, but from here it's over to you.
Kia ora, Brendan, thank you for that. Yes, so I will take you through our decision-making process based on the questions that you provided in the guidelines. So first question was, what else was considered? The council was mindful of previous determinations made by the council and the commission and the issues raised in the submissions and appeals in the previous representation reviews. I specifically asked the staff to consider the alternatives around urban and rural options right from the outset, because I was aware that they had been brought up and had been part of previous submissions. In terms of our decision-making process, in May 2021, we decided to introduce Māori constituencies. So the requirement to undertake another representation review was triggered, even though we'd only just completed one in 2019. The first issue for us was to ensure that all councillors knew what was required to be done, and to understand the history of representation in the region and the legal parameters for the task. So that is that the representation reviews are carried out under the provisions of the Local Electoral Act. A key part of the Act that we held foremost in our minds through this work was the section stating that councils and the Commission must ensure representation arrangements will provide for effective representation of communities of interest. They must also ensure there is fair representation of electors. Constituency boundaries must, as far as practical, coincide with the TA electoral boundaries. So that's the key piece of information that we were working with. Council also needed to ensure that decisions made fit within the framework established by the Act, and that provides for the balancing of the different factors when they're in conflict. So if there's a conflict between fair representation and effective representation. We held 2 workshops. The first one covered items including the history of representation in the region, previous decisions by both the Council and the Commission, the legislative requirements, and we established a timeline to meet those requirements. We did a review of the communities of interest in the region, and made sure we understood the key concepts for the communities of interest and the fair and effective representation. Having decided to provide for Māori constituencies, we also looked at how many Māori representatives the region could consider under the provisions and the impact this would have on the current arrangements. And we explored about 20 scenarios with various number of councillors as part of that workshop. We were aware that reducing the number of councillors below 11 in total would affect the number of Māori councillors possible and would reduce that from 2 to 1. Both the council and our Māori community strongly supported having 2 Māori members, and this was backed up by the surveys that we undertook prior to making our decisions. At that first workshop, we reached a reasonably high level of consensus on the following matters. So the first one was that we have 2 representatives elected from either 1 or 2 Māori constituencies. The second was that we preferred to have the total number of councillors not to exceed 12, and if we could make the numbers work, that the preference would be to have a lower number. We decided to, as far as possible, use the TA boundaries as constituency boundaries, and if that was not possible, then whole wards of the TA boundaries be used. And in addition, to provide both Ruapehu and Tararua with the most effective representation, and that we give serious consideration to both those constituencies being recognised as separate and distinct communities of interest, and with the degree of the isolation that we continue to have separate representation for both those communities. At the second workshop, we reaffirmed the high-level consensus reached at that first workshop, and we explored 7 main representation options with variations in the number of councillors and some constituency boundary alterations in order to seek the most effective representation. We were aware that all of the TAs in our region, except for Wanganui, were also carrying out representation reviews, and that Rangitike and Horowhenua were considering ward boundary changes. We are mindful that changes made by TAs may impact on any decision made by Horizons, as in fact happened in the 2019 representation review, where Manawatu altered its boundaries during its review. But despite this, we made every effort to explore representation based on communities of interest while trying to develop arrangements that were fair as possible, given the context in which the decisions had to be made. We were aware that we could develop arrangements that were closer to the fair representation threshold, but that came at the expense of combining communities of interest that would limit effective representation of distinct communities of interest by uniting 2 or more of those communities who had little in common. And the Commission will be aware, of course, that the limitations prescribed by legislation are not as flexible for a regional council as they are for a TA. At the conclusion of that second workshop, we gave guidance to officers in our preferred representation scenarios to enable them to develop a report for formal consideration by council. So your next question was to step you through the process, explain how we came to that decision. So I've outlined the workshop process. So the decision making was begun at the 24th of August council meeting last year, where we resolved to adopt our initial proposal, which was option 1B with 14 regional councillors. A report with all information previously presented at the two workshops was presented to us formally to consider at that meeting. There were 4 options singled out for special attention, but we also reviewed the extensive range of potential arrangements that we had discussed during the two workshops. The emphasis was on the requirement for constituencies to be based on groupings of communities of interest that do not split or create unnatural groupings, and whether effective representation could be provided to residents. We noted the extensive and varied nature of the region's geography and its communities and their distribution, the history and economic and social characteristics. In particular, we noted how the Ruapehu and Tararua constituencies are relatively remote and isolated, and I just wanted to give some more detail on our thinking around that. So Ruapehu covers a large area in the north, and that includes Tongariro National Park. It's relatively isolated by distance from the main population area of the region, and most of those who reside there would likely travel north rather than south to utilise services not available in the Ruapehu district. Compliance with the plus or minus 10% fair representation rule would require merging large areas of the Wanganui or the Rangitike constituencies with the Ruapehu district. And this would, in our view, split distinct communities of interest in the Wanganui and Rangitike constituencies and form an unnatural combining of the distinct Ruapehu community with part of another. Tararua is geographically separated by the ranges and is relatively isolated from the rest of the region. The inclusion of Tararua district in the region is primarily to connect with the upper catchment of the Manawatu River. Without the requirement for regional councils to be catchment based, it would make far more sense for the Tararua district to be part of either the Hawke's Bay Regional Council to the north or the Greater Wellington Regional Council to the south. And they much more strongly identify with those communities than they do with any of the ones in the rest of our region. And just to give you an example of some of the things we considered, I think option 2 that we considered had a map that drew a beautiful line showing joining the Horowhenua and the Tararua districts as one potential constituency. The numbers stacked up really well for fair representation, but what the map doesn't show is that you can't actually get from the Horowhenua to the Tararua. They're completely separated. You have to leave their districts, go through another one to make that connection. So clearly not a community of interest. We publicly notified our initial proposal on September the 1st last year. There were 11 submissions, including 1 late submission, 3 supported, 1 supported in part, and 8 opposed the council's proposal. All submitters were given the opportunity to present further to the council. Only 1 submitter, the late submitter, requested this but was unavailable at the time that was scheduled. On the 27th of October, after considering the submissions and reviewing the matters discussed at the 2 workshops, we resolved to adopt our initial proposal as our final proposal without any amendment. We notified this on the 3rd of November, and at the close of the appeal period on the 5th of December, there was 1 appeal lodged against the council's decision, and that of course was referred to the Commission in accordance with the Act. In our final proposal, the representation of Ruapehu, Manawatu, Rangitike, Palmerston North, Horowhenua and Tararua constituencies fall outside the stipulated plus or minus 10% range. We considered that the constituency arrangements proposed are the most effective to ensure the communities of interest are well represented. And that it does not create a barrier to participation. In addition, the arrangements proposed meet the strong direction in the Act for constituency boundaries to coincide with the local TA boundaries. Council clearly understood that we had to adopt an arrangement that reflected and recognised local identity and interests. Consideration of communities of interest at a regional scale is really challenging in our region, given the significant areas and variation in those communities of interest involved. I just wanted to give an anecdote here that I think helps explain the wide variety that we have in the Horizons region. I've often heard the description that when in 1989 the local government boundaries were drawn up, the regional councils were carved off neatly into areas of interest like Wellington, Taranaki, Hawke's Bay, and Horizons ended up being all of the bits left over in the middle that get tacked together. So that is why we range over such a large area, and we have a wide range of communities and geographical differences that make it very difficult using the provisions in the Act to completely meet all of those requirements around representation. We'd also note that the Act requirement to align constituency boundaries with TA boundaries does actually acknowledge that the smaller TA areas are deemed to already recognise and group together distinct communities of interest, hence our focus on keeping those boundaries. So you asked for a set of maps to be included. I understand that you have those, and asked for a map outlining the appellant scenario. There was no map produced for the appellant scenario. The appellant did not describe the 4 rural constituency boundaries proposed, but we believe that the map we have for our option 13 is probably the closest fit to the scenario that he described. What options were looked at to address the appellant scenarios? We did consider how we could provide for urban and rural constituencies. So option 13 considered an urban constituency comprising Palmerston North, Wanganui, Feilding and Levin, with the balance of the region being a rural districts constituency. However, choosing the boundaries for urban versus rural constituencies would be quite difficult in some areas. As an example, Wanganui district is elected at large and does not have separate wards, although it does have an established rural community. It would somewhat stretch the interpretation of the Act, requiring that constituency boundaries coincide with the boundaries of TAs or their wards by using the boundaries of an established community, such as the rural community, instead of using a ward. Alternatively, if the whole of Wanganui was included, then it would run contra to the urban community of interest argument by including a large rural community of interest. The appellant's submission identified Levin and Feilding as having populations of 18 to 20,000, which is larger than the populations of some of our proposed constituencies. And his strong preference was that the proposal complies with the fair representation criteria and suggests that these 2 urban areas are distinct communities of interest. However, when the Māori electoral population is taken into account, the proposed urban wards of Levin and Feilding, they no longer fall within that 10%, plus or minus 10% of the average for fair representation. So the use of urban and rural as a primary basis for identification of communities of interest has several problems, not least that it would still not necessarily address the plus or minus 10% rule for fair representation. So what are some of the reasons for not accepting the appellant scenarios? The appellant scenario singled out Palmerston North, Wanganui, Levin and Feilding as urban areas for separate representation, with Palmerston North having 3 or 4 reps and each of the others having 1 each. It proposed 4 separate rural areas with a single representative in each, but didn't specify where those boundaries should be, and he agreed with the 2 Māori constituencies. So in this scenario proposed, Palmerston North would actually include some rural areas and smaller settlements such as Linton, Ashurst and Bunnythorpe. Wanganui, unless of course the rural community boundary was considered appropriate as a constituent boundary, would include extensive rural areas and smaller settlements too, whilst the other 2, Levin and Feilding, would be essentially urban in nature. The 4 separate rural areas also contain many smaller urban settlements. So this means that there'd be many inconsistencies in what is defined as rural or urban in this scenario. The boundaries would also need to take into the consideration the requirement to identify communities of interest, and to provide fair and effective representation of those communities while still aligning the boundaries of each constituency with the boundaries of the TAs. We did not consider that the appellant's proposal provided for effective representation of communities of interest. In addition, the appellant's proposal to form 4 separate rural constituencies with relatively equal populations would require combinations of rural areas from constituent districts that would limit effective representation of distinct communities of interest. So as an example for that, the scenario is proposing that the urban area of Fielding would be considered a separate community of interest from all of the rural Fielding that surrounds that urban centre. And I think, and say that rural surrounds has more in common with the rural areas of the Wanganui or the Rangitikei rather than with the urban centre of Fielding, which I think if you asked anyone in Fielding, they would not make that distinction between the urban and rural of that community. So therefore, using the urban-rural distinction is somewhat arbitrary, and it clearly does split communities of interest. Did we test the appellant's proposals? No, we did not. The appellant's proposal did not specify where the boundaries for the 4 rural constituencies should be. And why have we decided to not go with those scenarios? So, as I've noted, the council reached a high level agreement at its first workshop that we wanted to use TA or ward boundaries as far as possible. When we formed our initial proposal, we reviewed all of the options considered at the workshops and confirmed this desire to use the TA boundaries. The submission made did not convince us that we needed to change that decision. The council considered that the constituency arrangements proposed in the final proposal are the most appropriate to ensure that the communities of interest of the constituencies that do not comply with the plus or minus 10% rule, as well as those that do comply, will be effectively represented, and the arrangements do not create barriers to participation. I think it's also important to note that while submitters have the freedom to suggest proposals without full regard and understanding for the legal framework, the council does not. Council must have regard to the requirements of the Act and seek to balance the fair representation and effective representation requirements throughout our decision making. Response to issues raised by the appellant. So the council acknowledges that the Ruapehu constituency at minus 49.82% is considerably overrepresented. This is actually an increase on the previous determination of the Commission. A significant contribution to this increase is the introduction of Māori constituencies and the transfer of about 1/3 of the population in Ruapehu from the general role to the Raki Māori constituency role. The council considers this overrepresentation can be justified as nothing significant has changed apart from the introduction of Māori constituencies since the Commission in 2007 first considered this issue. So in summary, it's council's view that the local electoral structure that the council has used for some time is widely regarded as providing effective representation of the communities of interest within the Horizons region. The final proposal provides dedicated representation for the geographical spread and comparatively isolated rural communities of Ruapehu and Tararua, which the council decided is vital. With respect to the final proposal overall, the council is strongly of the view that the proposal it has arrived at best provides for the effective representation of communities of interest within the region. I'd like to emphasise that the decision to introduce Māori constituencies shows every sign of being a positive one for Horizons regional communities. However, with the Māori electoral population not being spread evenly across the region, it has had a significant impact on the electoral populations within the general constituency structure. So for instance, as I said, some 30% of the electoral population in the Ruapehu constituency became part of the Māori electoral population, while in contrast in Palmerston North, the figure was less than 11%. And those on the Māori roll for the entire region is only 14%. So this exacerbated the previously approved non-compliance with the fairness ratio for the Ruapehu constituency. And our decision was arrived at after considering extensive background work on communities of interest and representation options and undertaking community engagement on the introduction of Māori constituencies and on the initial proposal. We started this process with a desire to have 12 or fewer councillors, and I believe the fact that we've actually ended up with 14 shows we engaged in the process with an open mind. The mathematics of keeping fair representation was very challenging, and we explored a wide range of scenarios to ensure that we did our absolute best to choose a model that met both fair and effective representation as best as is possible, given the nature of our region. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair Rachel. That's a very impressive summary and significant detail there. I just want to go to commissioners to check if there are any specific questions that you'd like to ask Commissioner Piper.
Thanks, Chair. That was very helpful. Just quickly, those figures that you just gave at the end about the Māori electoral population, 14% across the region, 11, I think you said, for Palmerston North. What was the one before that, the one that was quite high?
30% in the Ruapehu.
All right. Oh, gosh. Yeah, you can see. Yeah, no wonder that figure's jumped so much then. Just going to this issue, the government's, this might be a question for the officials, of course. I've never thought about this before, but the criteria in the Act about where practicable follow the territorial local authorities' boundaries. Why would have Parliament thought that that was important?
It sounds like a question to officials rather than the chair.
Yeah. But I'd be interested in their response because, I'm just thinking about that at the moment.
Can I throw that one to Daryl?
Sure.
Does Daryl have a perspective?
Well, he's been around for quite a long time, more than me, really.
Thank you. That's a good question, Commissioner Piper. It's interesting that community boundaries are not included, which would enable a little bit more flexibility. But I could not tell you why that decision would have been made at that time. Donald seems to have more view, a better view of that than I do.
We'll go to Donald.
Okay. My recollection is that, this is going back a long time, is that territorial authority boundaries were seen as reflecting communities of interest. That was part of their underpinning. There's also probably a practical reason in that the more you sort of depart from existing TA or ward boundaries, the more complicated you make the administration of elections. So more permutation of voting papers, candidates, booklets, so on and so forth. So it's probably at least a twofold rationale.
Thanks for that, Donald. Are there any other specific questions?
Yeah. I used to draft the ministerials explaining to councillors why they couldn't appoint the county engineer anymore. So I go back almost that far. No, I think actually that was the that's it. That's very helpful, everybody. Thank you.
Okay, we'll go to Commissioner Bigham just to check in.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That was really helpful. I actually don't have any questions at this time. Thanks, Brendan.
Okay, and I don't have any additional questions other than to acknowledge that through your presentation this morning, you ticked off quite a number of the points that we may well have wanted to ask as we've gone through. So I'm very impressed with that presentation, and that's negated the need to line up any additional questions. So thank you, Chair. That's great.
Thanks,
Rightio. So Penny, can you help us with Mark
Yes, I can.
So
So
what-
Mark is here with us. He's joining by phone. So I'll
right,
just,
yeah.
hopefully Mark can hear me. I'll just push some buttons at this end, and with a little bit of luck, that will bring Mark into the meeting, and we'll then be able to hear him speaking. One moment.
Okay, and commissioners, you've got, if you go to page, header. Why is it gone?
So while you sort out your page numbers, Brendan, I'll just check in with Mark. Can you hear us, Mark? And are you able to unmute yourself? Might be a little bit tricky to do the unmuting. I think if you push asterisk and then 6 on your phone, that should do the trick. That looks promising. Are you there, Mark?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me clearly?
We can hear you clearly. Thank you very much. That's excellent. I'll now hand over to Brendan to talk to you.
Good to Mark, I'm Brendan Duffy, just chairing this forum at the moment. Have you been observing in any manner up to now? No. So this is your opportunity to speak to your submission, and just to give you a sense of who's listening at the moment. There's 3 commissioners, Commissioner Bigham, Piper, and myself. There's 3 from the Commission office in Wellington, EJ, Donald, and Penny, and then from the regional council, got Chair Rachel and advisor Daryl on the screen, and additional staff from Horizons. So that's the just so you give you a bit of a sense of who you are talking to. Commissioners have got your submission. It's now your opportunity to add some additional points as you see fit. So I'll pass to you.
Okay, thank you, Brendan. Good morning, commissioners, councillors and advisors. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm Mark Chilcott, Manawatu resident most of my life and a Horizons ratepayer for around 30 years. I apologise that I'm not able to use Te Reo or Zoom, so my participation will be written form with an introduction. In my view, the introduction of Maori constituencies to the Manawatu Wanganui Regional Council is both welcome and long overdue. However, the review process has exposed the many representation deficiencies that already existed throughout the region. Council has seemingly always struggled with balanced, fair and effective representation across all its constituencies. I have never understood this problem because all the necessary tools are contained within the Local Electoral Act. When I examine the remarkable alignment of the constituencies with the principal river systems, the problem becomes clear. Achieving fair and effective representation across the region is a difficult task. Adding a river catchment factor makes the task impossible, as evidenced by the electoral arrangements proposed by Manawatu Wanganui Regional Council. I welcome any questions about my submission. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for those observations that you've identified there. It may not be deep questioning, but there may be some commentary to assist. I'm just moving to Commissioner Bigham first.
Good, Mark. Thank you for your time this morning and appreciate your efforts to join us by phone. That's really helpful. Just wanting to get some steer from you as to where you would think boundaries would need to be to achieve the representation that you think the council needs. Have you got any specific ideas of exactly where they may go?
Yes, I do. If you go to my submission remedies, paragraph 1, at the bottom there I say, without access to the statistical mapping available to council and the commission, I can only estimate the likely movement of boundaries. But if you refer to the Horizons map or my own one that I've provided, which is a derivation of theirs, I estimate the southern boundary of the Ruapehu constituency would probably move to around Hunterville somewhere. The western boundary of Tararua, near Palms North, would probably move to about Fitzherbert Road East. The northern boundary of Horowhenua would probably move to around Rongotia. And the northwestern boundary of Palmerston North constituency, I imagine, would coincide with the boundary of the new Fielding constituency. But they are only estimates.
Thank you, Mark. Were you able at all to do any, rather than the geographical boundaries that you suggest, were you able to do any calculations of voter numbers, etc., within those areas that you suggest?
Well, those areas that I'm suggesting, I estimate would bring all the constituencies within the plus minus 10% requirement.
Okay, thank you for your time.
Commissioner
Thank you.
Piper.
Thanks again for your submission. In paragraph 2 of your submission, discussing remedies, you've got some figures there of populations for the urban and rural parts of the I should say the district, the region. What are those? Which figures are those? Are they the general electorate population or the total population, or what?
Actually, that's a good question, because I had trouble reconciling those with what Horizons had produced in their discussion document. By addition of their estimates, I came to a figure of 145,600 for the 4 urban areas, and 72,800 for the remaining rural constituencies. But that's not entirely supported by the figures they supply. But then it's confused. In some parts of the discussion document, Wanganui urban is given as 39,700, and then other parts it's given as 42,200. And I believe all these are general, not including Maori population. So that's the best answer I can give you.
No, fair enough. Now, what about the your proposal doesn't fit in with the criteria of where practicable, regional councils' boundaries should follow territorial authorities' boundaries. Could you just discuss why you think that it is appropriate not to go to that criteria as part of the establishment of the wards?
Well, in my view, just looking at the problem from the outside, from a ground zero perspective, the first criteria you should apply is one of fair representation. Then communities of interest, because fair representation, once you achieve it, will inevitably give you communities of interest. The section 19U of the Act, if practicable, virtually allows, if a boundary of a constituency doesn't align with an existing ward or territorial boundary, then you can ignore it. Why not? The Act allows it.
Because your submission discusses the differences of the communities in the regional council's rohi. So I get the message I'm getting from your submission is that fair representation trumps effective representation. Is that?
Well, it has to,
have I got that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Well, yeah, clearly I've read your submission. Thank you, Mark. That was very helpful.
Brendan, you're on mute.
I think I've done the terrible thing and muted myself, which would be a terrifying thought for quite a lot of people, I would imagine. So now that we've unmuted Mark, just acknowledging that the commissioners have got the questions placed that they needed to. So thank you for the effort that you've put in to this process. We'll now look for the opportunity for the council to proffer a right of reply, and then the commission will deliberate on its own and make its final decision, which we have to have made by the 10th of April, just so you have some understanding about what happens from here. Is Mark still there?
Yes, I'm still here.
Okay, so just concluding that point and thanking you for your effort.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
And just Mark, just so you know, I'm going to pop you back onto mute, so we won't be able to hear you from this point forward, but you're welcome to stay and keep listening if you wish to.
Okay.
Okay, so Chair Rachel, you'll be pleased to know that you are now the local authority that holds the world record for keeping ahead of time. We're miles ahead of schedule, for which I am not complaining, be assured. So usually at this point we would take a wee break, and just let me check the time because and then you'd come back for a right of reply. Now, to be frank, I don't know that we've lined up anything specific that you need to respond to. I just want to check with commissioners on that. I think we're pretty comfortable, aren't we?
Yeah, but if the council wants 10 minutes
Yeah,
to have a
yeah.
quick chat, I can wait.
Yeah. So if we take a wee break now just to refresh, and can we come back at 10 o'clock? Is quarter of an hour enough, Rachel?
Yeah, that's plenty.
Yeah. Okay. So let's just take a break now. Penny will explain what we do. We'll come back at 10 o'clock. You might have some final comments you wish to make, and then we can sign off. Okay. Penny?
So just from our end of things, our live stream continues. So if everyone can just pop themselves on mute and turn their videos off, that's the safest way for our break to continue. And I'll pop up a wee message to anyone who happens to be watching our live stream just to let them know that we're having a break.
Okay. So back at 10 o'clock. Penny, we won't be ringing.
The government's just announced they're going to insist that properties be put on the hazard zones and protect councils, so long as they do it with good intentions, which is good news.
You know, just go and have a cup of tea like everybody else.
Ah, but you're such a good lad, aren't you? Well, Kapiti District Council will be relieved.
I didn't say it at the start, Rachel, which I usually do, is that if you see us all with our heads down, we haven't fallen asleep, we're just writing notes. It's this digital world, which technological world in which we live in. You see all these guys with their heads down, oh, they're not even listening to me. We are. I think we've got everybody, haven't we? One, two. Yep. Look, I think we can kick off, Rachel. Happy for you to just make some summarising comments.
Thanks, Brendan. I'll keep it brief. I just wanted to start by thanking the submitter for his concerns and his participation in the process. I mean, we don't very often get feedback from our ratepayers, and it's just wonderful when someone does participate fully in the process and let us know their thoughts. I just wanted to acknowledge his concerns, which I think are centred around the concept that the urban voice is underrepresented on our council, and that probably stems from the fact that regional councils are often dominated by rural interests. But I think I just wanted to summarise what I see as the difference between his approach and our approach, and I think Commissioner Piper summed that up where with the fair representation trumps effective representation. That's not our understanding of the Act or of the guidance that is provided by the Commission. Our understanding is that communities of interest they must be identified, and they are very important. There's a lot of weight goes on those, and that fair representation and effective representation must be balanced, and also that the TA boundaries must be followed wherever practicable. That phrase, where practicable, I think the appellant's view, in his view, does not give that very much weight, whereas again, our interpretation is that that has considerable weight. And it's an important aspect to consider, and there should be a very strong justification to not follow that guidance. So in summary, you know, like I said, the Horizons region is a difficult one to draw clear lines through it. It's not been an easy journey to come up with something that is perfect, and I don't think we have come up with something that is perfect, but we strongly believe that what we have come up with is something that does the job of fairly and effectively representing our constituents to the best ability that we can. And yeah, I think I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
No, that's brilliant, Chair Rachel, and thank you for those points of overview as we conclude the process. From here, the Commission will make its decision, obviously, and as you well know, we have to have all that done by the 10th of April. Just as we conclude, though, and I know I can't see Michael there, but your CE, I just want to pass on the Commission's thanks to you and your team for the work that's gone on in the background in preparation. We would acknowledge the challenges that you as a region have in terms of fair and effective representation. You know, to be frank, the work that your team have done is superb. It's very well presented. It's got significant detail around it. It's allowed us to easily understand the processes that have been followed. And that's all in the purest principles of, that which we think is important, which we know is important in terms of democratic representation. So I just want to make those acknowledgements to you. Always, when we're trying to do things on Zoom in this new technological world, there are challenges. So your team and our team have been working together, and we're grateful for the effort that's gone on in that space. So thank you for that. Just on a very, very personal nature, I was aware that you have a Michael Fryer on your team who I thought might have been participating. I just want you to pass regards back to him.
He's at the back of the room. He's just going to come up and wave at you.
Is he now? Okay. Well,
Good morning, Your Worship. How are you?
It's nice to see you, and I hope you're enjoying your time on the in the local government environment, Michael. We'll have to catch up at some stage. I've broken every rule doing that, but anyway, had to do it.
Well, you're still not 21, so that's always a good thing.
Didn't you have a story, Chair?
I did, but I'm not articulating it today.
Lovely to see you.
Fantastic. Nice to see you, Michael. Look, we'll close with our karakia. Benita is going to lead us through our closing karakia, and thanks again.
Oh, kia ora no tātou, tēnā koe I te tiamana, Chair, and your wonderful team. Thank you for virtually hosting us in your building this morning. We appreciate the time and effort. Our closing karakia is unuhia. Unuhia, unuhia, unuhia I te uru tapanui. Kia wātea, te ngākau, te tinana. Oh, have I gone off track? Te wairua I te ara takatū. Koiara I rongo, kia wātea, aira, ko wātea, hope, pai mariri. And I think I cut that short, but the intention is that it frees us up from the thoughts and the aspirations and the heaviness that we may have felt through this process, and frees us up to move into the rest of our day with good intention and good works and good hopes for all of us, our communities and our whānau. So go well, Tararua, in the Tararua room for Horizons District Council, Regional Council, sorry, and may everyone stay safe from the dreaded COVID. Kia ora tātou.
Good evening, Benita. See you all. Thank you.